As you take on this journey of true understanding as to who you are and what you are meant to do and create here on this physical plane, it's important you recognize the importance of leading with consciousness, but you must acknowledge the purpose and the reason why and how the ego actually influences and can essentially cause chaos along this process of you coming into this self-realization. Now, what I want you to understand is with ego, the ego we know has a nature, but we often struggle with what that nature is, how that nature is actually supposed to be a part of our lives and our spiritual walk. And so it's important, it's imperative that you really take time out to explore and ask the questions to gain more insight to what your ego is supposed to do for you. Because the ego is necessary. The ego is a part of this journey. It's important to not just focus on consciousness, because then you are ignoring the other aspect, the other side of the spectrum, and that will, in fact, keep you further away from actually achieving this personal fulfillment that you're seeking, because you're only dealing with half of the equation, right? Half of the whole completion of who you are. Remember, the consciousness and the ego are halves of the same whole. They need one another. And if you are only focused on one half of the whole, then you are missing the point, right? You're missing the mark. And you are going to take a journey where you are feeling like you are making progress, you are doing the things, but you are in fact continuously feeling like something is missing, right? And when you feel that, on those moments when you feel like something is missing along the journey, because you've read all the books, you've gone to all the seminars, all the workshops, you've seen all the teachers, but there is still a lack. There is still a emptiness that you feel. You have to take it back to the other aspect, the other side of who you are. And oftentimes people don't want to go there because they think that the other side of them is the dark side and that they shouldn't feed into this dark side of themselves. But everything has a dark side, right? There is the moon and the sun, right? We often want to look and enjoy the sun, but a lot of times we avoid the dark side. You have to always keep in mind that the two must come together. The two must be honored and acknowledged. And if you are not doing so, then you are not seeing the big picture. You're not fulfilling the objective, the mission here, which is to see the big picture of life in order for you to walk this path mindfully and to actually get to the point of full fulfillment and happiness. So what I want you to understand is that with the consciousness and with the ego, it is like, again, looking at two halves or two opposites, right? Think about, I often refer to following your consciousness as following the path of the hero, and following your ego is following the path of the villain. Also, following your consciousness is the path of the healer, the creator. Whereas when you are following the ego, you are following a path of disease and destruction. Now, those are very extreme concepts. Those are extreme cases, especially with the ego. When you are following that ego and you're really not aware and you're just on this path of destruction and negative programmings, negative triggers and emotions, that is often the path that is before you. But when there is some level of mindfulness and you are still understanding the importance of consciousness, but also understanding or you're living or being led by ego, then you're going into a space of seeing that, okay, there is a nature here. There is a point here, right? Whereas, consciousness can look at feminine energy, nurturing energy, whereas the ego is looked at as masculine energy, right? More of a assertive energy, an aggressive energy. You both need those. You need both of those, right? So you must be mindful that you have to put the ego in its proper place. Don't ignore it, because if you ignore it, that's when it's going to cause the most conflict within you. Ignoring it is a sign that you're not doing the proper work, right? So when the conflict comes up and you feel a sense of not getting anywhere, but you're doing the work anyway, then you have to reevaluate what it is that you're doing, right? Because you are focusing on just a part of the picture. The picture cannot be complete. The mission cannot be complete if you only focus on half of the mission, right? So you must keep in mind that there is another aspect that you must focus on. What is that? The ego. You must focus on what the ego's nature is to do for you, right? The ego's nature is to create a physical identity. It is to anchor you here in this reality of the human experience, being a person, being a African American, being a Caucasian person, being a European person, being whatever it is, a male, a female, right? It doesn't matter, but whatever it is that you identify as your experience, that is the ego's job, is to put those things in a perspective or a reality of how the world may interact with you and how you interact with the world. Now, if you identify with those things too much, then it will lead to the extremes, right? Being a villain, disease, destruction, being a destroyer. You don't want that, because that will, in fact, create that for yourself. That will reflect back to you, right? So whatever it is you are projecting out, even though from a very interesting perspective with the ego is oftentimes it is experiencing life from the outside. So the outside influences the person who is being led by the ego. So whatever the outside is saying, doing, or being, that individual will in fact be influenced by that, right? Their actions will be dictated or responsive. Whereas when you are being led by consciousness, you are leading the outside reality, okay? You are influencing everything around you, and you understand that it is your truest nature to influence everything outside of you because you are one with everything. Whereas being led by ego, now you are seeing things as a separation. Everything is separate, right? I am separate from you. You are separate from me. That is the mentality of it's me against the world. And because it's me against the world is against me and is fighting me. And so it creates this aggressive, villainous, destructive, malicious kind of mindset, spiteful, right? Revenge. Because something happens to me, then I must react and I must do it to them or to it, even worse. So recognize that the ego is living from a reality that is influenced by the outside world, right? Because it's created the outside world because its nature is to separate. It is a separator. Whereas consciousness, you are now understanding that you are creating the outside world, that life isn't happening to you, it is happening from you. So you are taking full control and accountability for everything that you are experiencing because it is a creation, it is a point of view, it is a perspective of your consciousness. Now, this can be very difficult when people are on this spiritual conscious journey and they're beginning the journey because you are transitioning from living from the ego into living from consciousness. And there is a point where those two things overlap, right? So okay, the ego needs to be put in its proper place. It is destructive if I let it, right? If I am not managing it well. And now I am being led by consciousness. So these two things are happening simultaneously where you are letting the outside world influence you, but yet you know that there is accountability that you must take to create and influence the outside world. And this is where the conflict comes in hand along the spiritual journey. This is how sometimes when people are not, consciously on the spiritual path, because we're all on the spiritual path, but some people are not conscious of it. Sometimes things tend to seem to go well for them, right? Even though they are, being a villain or being destructive. Sometimes things go well for them. And when you are leading that, there is a transition. The problem is being led by that is really short-lived, right? Those people burn out, something happens to them, disease, things of that nature. But when you are mindful and you want to live a life that is mindful and full of true fulfillment, and you want to live a nice, long, healthy life, and you make that transition from leaving the ego into consciousness, then you have to go a path that's more bumpy, right? Because now the path is based on the objective of getting a treasure, right? Like it's an adventure of, all right, we want this thing. We're going to have to go through some tough stuff to get there, to achieve it. And that is the journey itself, where you are making the transition from being led by ego to being led by consciousness. In order for you to do this, you have to practice mainly one thing, and that is self-awareness. The practice of actually paying attention to yourself, being aware of yourself, being aware of your thoughts, being aware of your emotions, okay? When you practice self-awareness, you will then put yourself in a position to observe everything that's happening when it happens, especially the big things, especially when you feel anger, when you feel frustration, when you feel sadness, even sometimes when you feel happiness. Ask yourself why. Why do you feel this, right? Is it in alignment with what it is that you wish to create? Or does it stem from a mindset of separation, right? Are you happy when somebody that you don't like experiences something negative? That's the ego. Even though it's happiness and that's quote unquote a positive emotion, the nature of why you were triggered to feel happy is grounded in a separation mindset, an ego mentality. Now, if you are happy because somebody you care about, right, is fulfilled in happiness, or somebody you don't like even is achieving something amazing, you can still identify and say, you know what, I acknowledge and I appreciate and I am happy for that person. Because now you are being led by consciousness, which sees that person as an extension of yourself. You see? So be mindful. Your emotions, your thoughts, your actions, all those things have to be observed. This is why practicing mindfulness, practicing meditation is helpful, because most times when you're out in the world, you can't just sit still and observe your thoughts. But when you're practicing awareness, self-awareness, and you're practicing being aware of your emotions and your thoughts and feelings, and then you're checking in with why you're feeling that, it just builds up the practice of really analyzing and letting go of the ego, because now you can see, okay, this doesn't really serve the higher good or my truer self. I need to let that mindset go and get into a positive mindset of acknowledging and realizing that all is one, and that I am on this journey of peace and beauty. And so letting go of ego is very important. Acknowledging consciousness and being led by consciousness is the objective, is the mission. But we still have to just acknowledge the ego and put it in its proper place, because now we can move forward as a whole. We can move forward complete. We can move forward not just acknowledging the best of us, but also acknowledging the quote unquote negative, or the quote unquote yang, right? Because we're talking about yin and yang, right? Well, consciousness is the yin aspect of yourself, whereas ego can be considered the yang aspect of yourself. You need both pieces in order for you to be complete and whole. Thank you so much. Feel free to go to drabundant.com, subscribe to my daily newsletter, and I invite you to join my Conscious Creator Circle, which is a paid membership which will allow you to get more detail into how you can create a shift, be a conscious creator, create the reality that you want. Continue to join me on this journey. Peace and abundance always.